Welcome to the Everyday Miracles podcast, where real life stories of hope and inspiration are shared. Every day, miracles are happening all around us, yet we rarely hear anything about them. Why is that? I'm Julie Hedenborg, and I've committed my time and energy to bring these stories to you, including some of my own personal experiences. My hope is that you'll be impacted the same way that I was. Join me in my journey to inspire change in a world that so desperately needs it. Hey, welcome back. This is Julie, and I have Brittany Akinzola with me today. And Brittany was introduced to me by Joel Delf. So thank you, Joel. Shout out to you. And Joel shared with me that she had a really interesting testimony of an experience that she had working for Samaritan's Purse, where she was essentially in the modern day Nineveh. Mm-hmm. And she had to take care of, she was able to take care of different people in a war situation. Mm-hmm. People that were civilians, people that were soldiers, people that were enemies, all together. And so we're going to ask her a little bit about her experience today. What year was that happened?
This was in 2017. Yeah, like the beginning, like we deployed out the day after Christmas 2016.
Wow. Yeah. And how close were you? I understand this was like a pop-up ICU you told me a long time ago.
Yeah, it's a hospital that Samaritan's Purse has, and they can deploy it to any disaster that happens. It's mobile. Mm-hmm. So we were able to take it and just set it a few kilometers outside of the front lines. It was close enough to where you could hear like bombings and gunshots like through the night as you were caring for the patients there.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Were you terrified at times?
You know, it sounds crazy, but no, mm-hmm. not because of anything other than I feel like I entered the experience prayerfully, and I felt confident mm-hmm. that that's where God had called me. And Samaritan's Purse, the organization that I deployed with, they did, a remarkable job with safety. We had large blast walls, 3 layers of security that were there to help protect us, including the Iraqi special forces. And so we were well taken care of security-wise. So as far as that goes, no, I never felt unsafe.
That's amazing. Thank you for your work and what you're doing, and those in service too that were there defending our country. You told me about a situation once where you had patients that were, and I know you saw a lot of things that were very gory and very graphic, and I don't really want to get too far into that. But what I do want you to talk about, you had civilians and soldiers and you had enemies in the mm-hmm. same area.
Yeah.
So can you share a little bit about what that was like?
Yeah. So the hospital was set up in that we had different wards. So you would have one ward for women and children, a different mm-hmm. ward for the enemies or ISIS mm-hmm. was specifically who it was, where we were. And then the Iraqi soldiers, like everyone had a different area. But the ICU that we deployed with the hospital was 4 beds. Mm-hmm. And we had 2 nurses, so 2 patients to each nurse that would work out of the ICU. And so we could not split our efforts because we had very high level care there. So ventilator support, different medications that can only be run in an ICU. And we didn't have the ability to separate them out in different wards. So anyone that needed that level of care, no matter who you were, they all landed in our unit. So it was very unique in that there were times where I would land with the patient load, and in our ICU, we would have a little girl that was bombed by ISIS. There was an Iraqi soldier. This is a real instance where I had a little girl in one bed, an Iraqi soldier that was shot by ISIS. I had a mom and a wife that was car bombed trying to flee the conflict, and then an actual ISIS soldier that was my 4th patient, all at the same time, in that one unit. And so it was I would be lying if I said it was easy all the time. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of internal things that we all had to, all of us being the healthcare providers and the people serving in the hospital, that we had to kind of sift through and sort through within ourselves to be able to provide the same level of care to all people that came to the doors, because that was the expectation. We weren't there just to be there. We were there as a Christian organization, and we are called, as we know, to love our neighbor, all of our neighbors, all people coming to our doors that need our care. That was what we were there to do, and that's what we did.
Wow.
So
I know you told me a little bit about an interaction that you had. I can't even imagine
yeah.
having to care for someone who
Mhm.
is trying to kill us.
Yeah.
Tell me what that was like for you.
Yeah. So the specific instance that you're talking about, I believe, is where the instance where I gave you my patient load in. One of them was being an ISIS
Yeah.
fighter and having the young child that is dying
Mm.
is never an easy thing. And then the same thing with the soldier. And then the mom, we're just not sure if she's going to make it or not. But then we know that this ISIS fighter is going to be fine. And so there was a time where when he came out of surgery and he was our fourth patient, and he asked for a drink of water, and begrudgingly, it's kind of like, no, you don't ask me for anything. And that's like the natural inclination that I had in the moment. We a lot of us on the team that were there, we were reading through the book of Jonah on a pretty regular basis because we were in Mosul, Iraq, which is modern day, like that's today, but it is same geographically Nineveh in the Bible. So the book of Jonah felt very relevant because that's where he was running from, because it was a very wicked place, which, go figure. It And the time I was there, also same thing, a very wicked place.
Yeah.
And so the story felt real to us. It felt like the Bible just like came alive, and it was what we were living in. And then I know in the book of Jonah, when he shares the message of God, right, with the people, and then he looks at how God is delivering them once they start fasting and praying, and he just walks outside of the city, and he's just very upset, and seemingly upset. And I feel like that's kind of the place where I had gotten. And I know that in the book it doesn't give you a real resolution to the story, but I feel like the power in that was that I felt like I had the power to write the end of the story as I was living it out. And so while people will give Jonah a very hard time, I think it's just different whenever you're looking that evil in the face and you're forced into a position where you see the grace of God working in this soldier's life, just like you see it in that biblical story. And I know that when you're reading it, it looks like it's a very wrong thing that he does by being upset by it. But I have to tell you, it's not as easy when you're looking at an ISIS fighter that just blew up or shot all of these patients that you're caring for, and then you want to do the same thing. I wanted to walk away. It wasn't anything other than, I think, just a lack of, it's so difficult to comprehend, I think.
I
The grace of God, right? It's like, how are you the one that's going to be okay, right? That we know is going to be okay. But in that moment, I felt, as I wanted to walk away and began to actually, I felt like it was very clear to me where God revealed, like, how dare you? Like, this is not what I've called you to do. This is not who I've called you to be. Wow. And so in that moment, you get him the glass of water. And that's what I did. I was like, I won't turn my back on someone that God has brought to this facility where we're called to care for these patients. And so, in bringing him the glass of water, and then continuing to care for all of the patients around him, I feel like God worked through that, just through the willingness of us to push through the barrier, to push through the difficult times. And what we began to see was that, like, you hear, oh, people are always watching you, and you hear that, but it's so true. I know that, like, getting him the glass of water and then caring for him in the same way that we cared for our other patients. And if you've ever been in a near-death experience or been through something traumatic like that, lost a loved one, then you know that you begin to evaluate life at a different level. And we're all more vulnerable in those situations. And the unique thing about us being there is that, and being a Christian organization, is that we caught people when they were very vulnerable. It was a very traumatic situation that everyone was coming out of.
Oh, yeah.
And so I believe that us being uniquely positioned where we were, and serving who we were serving, it just began to knock down some barriers and began to act like to begin to kind of almost like force people into asking the questions why. Like, why are these people here? Why would they treat me this way? And in that particular ISIS fighter's case, he began to ask the question, why would you treat me the same way and provide these things for me that you provide for these people that I meant harm? And he began to ask himself these questions, and he began to ask us questions. So through an interpreter, we had interpreters available at all times. He would ask questions like, like, why are you here? Like, this isn't what I've heard about you, or, like, can you explain to me like why you would come into a dangerous place like this when you live in America? Or, like, and he was just so curious, and like, just, it was just totally opposite of what he had heard about Americans or other people around the world. It was just highly contrasting what he'd heard. And from that, we began to just share with him the reason that we were there. And that is the gospel, like, so just, answering his questions and providing him care. And I think bigger than the reason that we were there, I think our actions spoke volumes louder to the reason that ultimately that ISIS fighter gave his life to Christ.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah.
That's amazing.
I know we saw miracles like that happen. And the hospital is just like these, I mean, they're Army grade tents. They're very, very nice tents. They can last for 10 years in different conditions, but in the walls of tents, which is crazy, right? It's like a mobile hospital. You literally see miracles like that happen.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
And you learned more about his life. And
I did.
Can you share a little about that?
Yeah. This particular person that I was taking care of, this ISIS fighter, as we began to talk, and he wanted to learn more about us. And so we began to ask him questions. I learned that he was very young. He was 19 years old. And as I learned more about the circumstances that led him to be in the position that he was in, it was more like a force thing, meaning that he, in order to provide safety for him, safety for his brothers, and to have food and to prevent them, because they had been left behind, a lot of their family were able to escape, but they were younger boys left in those circumstances. They joined forces with ISIS, and the fact that they would care for them and not kill them, and that they would feed them and clothe them and do all the things that that they felt like they didn't have, because regardless of the circumstances of why they were left in the war zone, they felt abandonment. And then here are these people willing to take them in. So for him, what he truly felt was that these were the good people, because these were the people that he'd seen care for him. And he trusted the things that he was being asked to do were what was best. And obviously it's not that it's right. It's just that when you have more of an understanding, it just makes people more human to you, I think, in a moment. Whereas if not taking the time to listen and understand, I'm not sure that the message that we were there to ultimately, yes, healthcare, but also the gospel, I'm not positive that it would have penetrated his heart the way that it did. And it just it was very moving, because I have a sister that was his age at the time.
Oh, wow.
And so I just began to see him in just a different light, and just began to question. I don't know what I would have done in that circumstance. I'm not saying I would have joined forces with the same thing, but again, my upbringing is very different, but at the same time, you just began to think about someone, how influential they are at that age, and what that must have been like to have your parents leave you and those type of circumstances. And he made it clear it wasn't that they necessarily wanted to, but the vehicle and the circumstances that they were able to escape under did not accommodate how large their family was. And so it just was very eye-opening, because I feel like I just looked at them blankly, like just not, almost like inhumane, just because of the cruel things that they do.
Very cruel.
And it's awful, and it's something that, I mean, many of us that were there, we still deal with and have to process through on a regular basis, because it's just the most awful things we've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
But I think just having that little bit of insight to him gave me hope in humanity. I would say just seeing, and then seeing God work through, if God can work through someone like that, someone that has done the things that young boy has done. I feel like, to me, that was the impossible, and God did it, and it grew my faith.
Yeah.
Because if you could have just only seen what we saw and what his hands had touched and done, and then to see God have mercy on that and save someone like that, it's just it taught me so much more about grace than what I think I could have ever learned in any other circumstance. So
amazing. Yeah, that is amazing. Thank you for sharing this.
Yeah.
It's, we are all his children.
Yeah.
And I think it's a reminder too, again, I want to thank everyone who goes and serves in this capacity, because it is huge. I want to thank everyone who's serving in terms of the military, missionaries. Change can happen. And I think it's also a reminder too that we need prayer. We're in a spiritual battle. This is a spiritual warfare thing, and we need to be praying every day for our country. We need to be praying, God, help us to love when it feels impossible. Help us to forgive when it feels impossible. And we need to remember to try to extend that grace when it feels impossible.
Yes,
too.
Exactly.
So thank you for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yes. And I hope that you have been inspired by this today. It was a very different topic. I feel privileged to have talked with you today. And we just ask, if you have anything that you want to share with us, please send it to me at everydaymiraclespodcast@gmail.com. Thank you, and God bless.